never thought my own father would humiliate me on the most important day of my son's life. He lifted his glass, smirking, and announced to the entire wedding, "Here comes my biggest disappointment, Eliza." People laughed. My chest tightened. I almost walked out until someone in uniform turned, stared at me, and said, "Sergeant, is that really you?" The room went still. My father went pale. And for the first time in my life, everything flipped. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed, because what happened that night still gives me chills. My name is Eliza Monroe, and I still remember the exact sound of my father's laugh, the kind that made your stomach sink and your cheeks burn at the same time. It wasn't the warm, joking laugh of a parent. No, it was sharp, deliberate, and always at my expense. I was 8 years old the first time I realized my dad didn't see me as his daughter. He saw me as a punchline. We were at my cousin's birthday party, and before I could even blow out the candles, he pointed at me and said, "Eliza, make a wish and hope it's better than your grades." The room erupted. Everyone laughed. I wanted to vanish. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. Mom tried to intervene, quietly pulling at his sleeve, whispering something soft and pleading. But it was like trying to stop a storm with a napkin. My father's attention didn't waver from me. I learned quickly. I was small, invisible, and replaceable in his eyes. That night, I hid under my blankets, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was ever going to be enough. And in that silence, I made a promise to myself. Someday, I would be seen not as a joke, but as a person who mattered. School wasn't much better. Kids repeated my father's jokes. Teachers didn't notice the quiet tears, and I learned to shrink, to blend into walls, to carry his laughter in my chest like a secret wound. Every day felt like walking through a field of glass, afraid one slip would shatter me completely. But something inside me was stubborn. Maybe it was my mother's soft encouragement, or maybe it was the little voice that refused to let me disappear. I didn't know it then, but that stubbornness would become the backbone of the life I would later forge. By the time I turned 17, I knew I had to leave, literally and figuratively. I wasn't going to let his words define my life. That decision set me on a path I didn't yet understand, the military. Discipline, resilience, leadership are all tools I would need to reclaim my life. But leaving wasn't the end of the story. That shadow of humiliation followed me, like a stubborn ghost. And just when I thought I could outrun it, life decided to test me in a way I never expected. Because some pasts don't let you go quietly, and mine was about to make its presence known at a wedding. You won't believe the first time he tried to embarrass me as an adult, and how the entire room froze in shock. I thought I had escaped him. I really did. After years of hiding, laughing along just to survive, and finally enlisting in the military, I believed I had built a wall strong enough to keep his cruelty out. But life has a way of dragging old ghosts back into the light. It was my son's wedding, a grand hall filled with sparkling lights, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. I should have been happy, soaking in the joy of the day. But then I saw him, my father. That smug grin, the one that always felt like a punch to the stomach, staring straight at me from across the ballroom. Before the ceremony even began, he leaned over to one of my mother's friends and said loud enough for half the room to hear, "Let's see if Eliza can keep the bridegroom alive without tripping over her own feet." The room erupted in laughter. My chest tightened. I forced a smile, but inside, my old 8-year-old self was screaming. I felt trapped between years of learned silence and the urge to finally stand up. The whispers and stares of the guests made it worse. I could feel my heart pounding like a drum, each beat a reminder of every cruel word he had thrown at me over the years. Mom shot me a helpless glance. I nodded slightly, a silent apology. She couldn't fix this one, not now. But then, something unexpected happened. A few of my son's groomsmen, big, confident guys who didn't know me from Adam, stepped in. One of them, tall and muscular, looked straight at my dad and said, Hey, maybe knock it off. She's the reason we're all here today. Show some respect." The laughter died. My father blinked. Shock, disbelief, maybe even fear. I almost laughed myself, almost. But this was real. Finally, someone else saw me the way I deserved to be seen. And then it hit me. This was my moment. The moment I could reclaim the dignity he had stolen from me for decades. But he wasn't done. Oh no, not yet. And I had no idea how far he was willing to go to push me back into that corner I had spent a lifetime escaping. What he did next left the entire wedding in stunned silence, and it forced me to make a choice that would change everything. Before the wedding, I often reminded myself that the military had saved me. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, everything. At 19, I enlisted, and every drill, every early morning run, every shouted order became a brick in the wall I was building around the pain my father left behind. Boot camp was hell, no sugarcoating it. The sergeants barked, the barracks smelled like sweat and fear, and every mistake was punished. And yet in that chaos, I found something I didn't know I had. Strength. Real strength. Not just muscles, but a spine that refused to bend, eyes that refused to look down. I rose through the ranks because I had no choice. The little girl hiding behind curtains wasn't going to survive in the field. But Eliza Monroe, the woman in uniform, with medals glinting on her chest, could stand tall. I learned to lead, to protect, to command. I became someone my father didn't recognize, someone he had no power over, or so I thought. Even then, he found ways to sneak into my mind. He would call during holidays, cracking jokes about how I probably couldn't even lift a toolbox. I'd hang up, fists clenched, and remind myself that out there, in the real, rough world, I was stronger than anyone who ever tried to belittle me. But here's the thing about trauma. It doesn't disappear just because you're strong. That old voice, the one that laughed at me, still haunted the edges of my victories. Each award, each commendation, each leadership position felt a little hollow when I imagined him scoffing from afar. Then came the wedding, the very place I thought I had left him behind. I realized quickly that the military had trained me to face enemies, but not the ones who lived in my childhood memories. Standing there in my dress, watching him smirk across the ballroom, I felt that old mix of fear and anger. But unlike before, I didn't freeze. I didn't run. I remembered every drill, every command, every lesson in discipline and resilience. And suddenly, I understood that this wasn't just about me. It was about my son, about setting a standard that no one, not even my father, could undermine. I felt a surge of clarity. He could try to embarrass me, humiliate me, but he could never erase the woman I had become. And when my son's groomsmen intervened, defending me publicly, it wasn't just a shield, it was validation. A reminder that strength could inspire others to stand with you, and that no laughter from the past could silence the respect earned in the present. Yet, as the tension thickened, I knew this was only the beginning. The confrontation with my father wasn't over. It was about to move from whispers and smirks to a reckoning that would shake the room, and finally, me, to my core. When he crossed the line again, I had to make a choice that would either break me or finally set me free. Before the wedding, I often reminded myself that the military had saved me. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, everything. At 19, I enlisted, and every drill, every early morning run, every shouted order became a brick in the wall I was building around the pain my father left behind. Boot camp was hell, no sugarcoating it. The sergeants barked, the barracks smelled like sweat and fear, and every mistake was punished. And yet in that chaos, I found something I didn't know I had. Strength. Real strength. Not just muscles, but a spine that refused to bend, eyes that refused to look down. I rose through the ranks because I had no choice. The little girl hiding behind curtains wasn't going to survive in the field. But Eliza Monroe, the woman in uniform, with medals glinting on her chest, could stand tall. I learned to lead, to protect, to command. I became someone my father didn't recognize, someone he had no power over, or so I thought. Even then, he found ways to sneak into my mind. He would call during holidays, cracking jokes about how I probably couldn't even lift a toolbox. I'd hang up, fists clenched, and remind myself that out there, in the real, rough world, I was stronger than anyone who ever tried to belittle me. But here's the thing about trauma. It doesn't disappear just because you're strong. That old voice, the one that laughed at me, still haunted the edges of my victories. Each award, each commendation, each leadership position felt a little hollow when I imagined him scoffing from afar. Then came the wedding, the very place I thought I had left him behind. I realized quickly that the military had trained me to face enemies, but not the ones who lived in my childhood memories. Standing there in my dress, watching him smirk across the ballroom, I felt that old mix of fear and anger. But unlike before, I didn't freeze. I didn't run. I remembered every drill, every command, every lesson in discipline and resilience. And suddenly I understood that this wasn't just about me. It was about my son, about setting a standard that no one, not even my father, could undermine. I felt a surge of clarity. He could try to embarrass me, humiliate me, but he could never erase the woman I had become. And when my son's groomsmen intervened, defending me publicly, it wasn't just a shield, it was validation. A reminder that strength could inspire others to stand with you, and that no laughter from the past could silence the respect earned in the present. Yet, as the tension thickened, I knew this was only the beginning. The confrontation with my father wasn't over. It was about to move from whispers and smirks to a reckoning that would shake the room, and finally, me, to my core. When he crossed the line again, I had to make a choice that would either break me or finally set me free. The music swelled, chandeliers sparkling overhead, but I could barely hear it. My father's grin was fixed, smug, like he owned the whole room, and maybe, for decades, he had. I felt the old sting, that familiar ache from my childhood, crawling up my spine. Before anyone noticed, he leaned toward the microphone meant for toasts and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Let's give it up for Eliza, the girl who never got taller than her own jokes." The room erupted in laughter. My stomach flipped. I wanted to vanish, sink through the polished floor. I could feel my son's eyes on me, a mixture of confusion and embarrassment, and my cheeks burned hotter than they had at any school recital. But this time, I didn't freeze. I didn't shrink. I drew a slow, steadying breath. Memories of boot camp, of leadership drills, of every hard-earned medal rushed through me. This was my moment to reclaim every ounce of dignity he had stolen from me. I stepped forward, heels clicking on the marble floor. The laughter started to die down, partly because people were noticing the tension, partly because no one had ever seen me like this. I let my voice carry, firm, calm, but cutting. Today isn't about jokes. It's about family, and I refuse to let past pain steal my son's happiness, or mine anymore. A hush fell. My father froze mid-smirk, as if someone had yanked the rug from under him. And then an unexpected sound. One of my son's groomsmen, tall and broad, stepped up beside me. "Seriously, man, knock it off," he said. "You don't get to ruin this day. She worked her ass off to be here, and you, well, you're just embarrassing yourself." Eyes widened, glasses clinked. The whole ballroom went silent. My father's jaw tightened, and for a brief second I saw hesitation, shock, even fear. I straightened my shoulders. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to cry. I just spoke the truth. This day is about love, not humiliation, and I am not your punchline anymore. For the first time, the people around me clapped. Warm, real applause. Strangers, family, friends, everyone acknowledged it. And my father, he blinked, momentarily powerless, realizing that the little girl he once mocked had grown into a woman he could no longer intimidate. The moment hung in the air like lightning, electrifying and raw. I felt a rush of triumph, yes, but also a strange, tender sadness. This confrontation had been years in the making, a collision of childhood wounds and adult courage. But even as the applause faded, I knew this wasn't the end. My father still had his stubborn ways. True change wouldn't come from one confrontation. There was still a journey ahead, a reckoning that would take me beyond the ballroom, back to the very place where our story had begun. The repair shop, the smell of oil and metal, the ground where my childhood and adulthood collided. And I had to be ready. 2 days later, I returned to the repair shop, and what he said to me there changed everything I thought I knew about him. 2 days later, I found myself standing outside my father's old repair shop. The faded green door looked smaller than I remembered. The smell of oil and grease hitting me like a memory I hadn't wanted to revisit. Yet here I was, ready. I pushed the door open. The familiar clang of metal, the smell of motor oil, the faint hum of a radio, it all transported me back to those long, humiliating afternoons of my childhood, when every visit felt like a test I could never pass. And there he was, my father leaning against the workbench, wiping his hands on a rag, that same smug grin, except this time it faltered. Maybe he finally realized I wasn't that little girl hiding behind the curtain anymore. I didn't start with anger. I didn't scream or yell. I just looked him in the eye and said, "I'm done, Dad, done being the joke. Done carrying your laughs like scars on my back. This ends now." He froze. His rag hung in midair. Then he muttered something I never expected. I never wanted to hurt you, Eliza. I didn't know how else to be." I blinked. That admission wasn't apology, it was fear. Fear that his own cruelty had left him powerless. Fear that his daughter, the girl he mocked for years, had grown beyond him. And I realized something in that dusty, oil-scented shop. My power didn't come from proving him wrong. It came from claiming my own life, my own dignity, my own story. And for the first time in decades, I felt that power like fire in my veins. We didn't solve everything that day. Change doesn't come in one tidy conversation. But the first step had been taken. I had drawn the line. I had demanded respect. And in that simple act, something shifted. Even he seemed different. Subtle gestures, small acknowledgments, he started noticing things. Listening. Trying. I wasn't expecting perfection, just a sign that the dynamic between us could actually change. And as I left that shop, stepping back into the sunlight, I felt lighter than I had in years. I felt a strange mixture of triumph, relief, and a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the past didn't have to define the future. But life had one more test. One final stage where the lessons of my childhood, my military training, and my reclaimed dignity would collide. And I could feel it coming, like a storm on the horizon. The next family gathering would test everything I thought I'd learned, and force my father to finally see me for who I really was. After that day at the repair shop, life didn't magically change. My father didn't suddenly become warm and loving, and I didn't suddenly forget decades of ridicule. But there was a shift, subtle, almost imperceptible, like the first cracks of sunlight through a stormy sky. It started with small things. He stopped making jokes about me in front of family. He called instead of texting, asked how I was doing instead of assuming he already knew. Once, he even asked for my opinion on a project he was working on at the shop. I could feel my jaw tighten and my heart beat faster. Was this real, or just another trick? I realized that change rarely announces itself with fireworks. Most of the time, it sneaks in quietly, through gestures that seem insignificant to anyone else, but to someone carrying years of pain, they are monumental. I began to notice him watching me with a kind of cautious respect, a look that said he knew I was different, stronger, wiser, untouchable in ways he had never imagined. It wasn't love yet, and maybe it never would be fully, but it was acknowledgement. And for me, after a lifetime of mockery, acknowledgement felt like victory. Even family gatherings became a different battlefield. The old tension didn't vanish, but I walked into each event like I owned the room, like the laughter wasn't mine to fear anymore. And slowly, others noticed too. People began seeing me not as the girl my father mocked, but as the woman I had become, resilient, disciplined, and unshakably dignified. Still, every interaction reminded me of the work left to do. The past could never be erased, and some wounds would always ache. But I realized something essential. Reclaiming your dignity isn't about rewriting history. It's about standing tall in spite of it. One afternoon, he even offered a small compliment, awkwardly but sincerely. "Eliza, you handled that presentation better than I thought anyone could." My stomach tightened, not with old fear, but with the thrill of recognition. Recognition that I had earned. Recognition that my life was my own. And in that moment, I knew the path of respect wasn't about one dramatic confrontation. It was about consistency, patience, and refusing to be small anymore. Every conversation, every encounter, every step forward mattered. But I also knew that the ultimate test wasn't in words. It would come at a larger stage, in front of a room full of people, where my father would have to face the undeniable reality. The little girl he laughed at had grown into someone untouchable. And when that day arrived, the lesson would be clear, not just for him, but for everyone watching. At the next big family gathering, he finally had to confront the woman I had become, and what he said left me stunned. The next big family gathering arrived, and I felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Every step toward the event hall echoed with memories of childhood humiliation. But now, I carried something stronger: self-respect, discipline from the military, and the quiet confidence that I had earned my place in this world. As soon as I entered, I could see him, my father. The same smirk, the same eyes that had haunted me for years. But this time there was hesitation. He had seen what I could do. He had felt my boundaries. And maybe, just maybe, he understood that the little girl he mocked wasn't there anymore. The event began, laughter and chatter filling the room. He tried at first, oh, of course he tried, to make a joke at my expense. But it fell flat. People exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh. And I held my head high. The old fear gone, the old shame burned away by years of proving my worth. Then it happened. My father, in front of everyone, raised his glass and said something I never thought I'd hear. "I'm proud of my daughter. Eliza, you've become someone remarkable." I froze, the room went silent, and then applause. Genuine, heartfelt, unstoppable. Strangers, family, friends, everyone recognized it. My father's words weren't perfect. They were awkward, slightly stiff, but they were real. I felt tears rise. Not the tears of pain I had carried for decades, but tears of triumph, of release, of finally being seen. That moment wasn't just a public acknowledgement, it was a turning point. A demonstration that dignity could be reclaimed, even after years of ridicule. Even my father seemed surprised by his own words. Perhaps he realized that respect isn't something you can demand forever. It has to be earned, and sometimes the person you least expect teaches you the lesson. And in that applause, in that small but monumental recognition, I felt a shift. My story was no longer his to tell or twist. It belonged to me. Every humiliation, every laugh, every scar had been transformed into strength. But life doesn't stop testing you. That day was victory, yes, but it also hinted at something deeper: the power of setting boundaries, claiming respect, and proving that even the hardest past could be overcome. Yet even after this public acknowledgement, the journey wasn't over, and one private confrontation would finally force my father to reveal a truth I never expected. 2 days after that family gathering, I found myself back at the repair shop, the place that held so many of my childhood memories, both bitter and formative. I wasn't there to relive the past. I was there to finish it, to draw a line that could never be crossed again. He was leaning over a workbench, just as he always had, rag in hand, the smell of oil thick in the air. I paused at the doorway, letting my eyes take him in. The years had aged him, yes, but the arrogance, the confidence he once wielded like a weapon, seemed diminished. There was hesitation in his stance, uncertainty in his eyes. "I need to say this face to face," I began. "I'm done being your joke, done letting your words dictate my self-worth. You can no longer treat me as less than I am." He straightened and blinked, the first true vulnerability I had ever seen in him. "Eliza, I've been afraid. Afraid of failing, afraid of being seen as weak, and somehow, I thought laughing at you would hide that." I felt my chest tighten. His admission was messy, awkward, but it was real. For decades, I had carried humiliation like armor, and suddenly, the person who inflicted it was exposing his own fear. I realized then that my power wasn't in punishing him. It was in standing firm, in refusing to carry his cruelty any longer. I felt strength I hadn't known I possessed, flowing through me like a river I could finally navigate on my own terms. We didn't solve everything that day. There were no perfect apologies, no sweeping gestures of love. But the first step had been taken: recognition, respect, the beginning of a relationship that could exist without cruelty. And something shifted in him. Small gestures followed. He asked questions, he listened more, and for the first time he acknowledged me not as a target of jokes, but as his daughter, a leader, a woman of discipline and dignity. Walking away from that shop, the sunlight felt different, lighter. I felt triumph, yes, but also a quiet peace I hadn't known since childhood. The battle wasn't about winning against him, it was about reclaiming myself. Yet even as I embraced this newfound empowerment, I knew life wasn't finished testing us. True respect, real change, wasn't a single conversation. It was a series of moments, small and monumental, and the next challenge would come at home, in front of family, where our new dynamic would be tested once again. The next family gathering would be the ultimate test, where my father would have to publicly face the woman I had become, and I would see if all my courage had truly transformed our relationship. The next family gathering felt different from the moment I walked in. I could sense it, the air itself seemed charged. Everyone knew something had changed, even if they couldn't put it into words. And at the center of it all, my father. The man who had haunted my childhood, whose jokes had once made me shrink into the shadows, now faced the woman I had become. The day unfolded slowly, the usual laughter and chatter punctuated by glances toward me. I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. I walked through the room with my head high, carrying every lesson I had learned, the discipline from the military, the strength I had earned, the courage I had fought for in every scarred corner of my life. And then, in front of everyone, he did something I had waited years to hear. He raised his glass, eyes meeting mine, and said, "Eliza, I'm proud of you. You've grown into someone I never thought I could understand fully, but I see you now and I respect you." Time seemed to freeze. The room went silent for a heartbeat, then erupted, not with laughter but with genuine applause. My mother's eyes glistened, my son smiled proudly, and strangers in the room looked on, moved. I felt tears rise, not the tears of humiliation or pain that had shadowed my youth, but tears of triumph, of release, of being truly seen. After decades of ridicule, I had reclaimed my story. I had taken the shame that had been imposed on me and transformed it into strength. My father's smile was awkward, a little unsteady but real. No sarcasm, no mockery. For the first time, he acknowledged me as the woman I had become, not the little girl he had spent years diminishing. It wasn't perfect. Our relationship still had cracks, the residue of years of hurt, but it was real. And for the first time, I felt that redemption was possible, not for him necessarily, but for me. I realized something profound in that moment. Reclaiming your dignity doesn't require revenge. It doesn't need grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It needs courage, persistence, and the willingness to stand tall, even when the world, or your own father, has spent a lifetime telling you to shrink. The applause continued, echoing in the room and in my heart. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace and triumph that I had never known. I had faced my past, confronted the pain, and emerged not only unbroken, but stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever imagined. As the evening drew to a close, I noticed my father watching me, a subtle nod of respect in his eyes. A small gesture, yes, but monumental. A sign that even long-held wounds could begin to heal when met with courage, honesty, and self-respect. I looked around at my family, my friends, my son, and I felt it, a full circle of triumph. Life hadn't erased the past, but I had claimed my present. I had reclaimed my story. And for the first time, I knew that no one, not even the person who hurt me most, could take that away. The little girl hiding under the curtains had grown, and she would never hide again. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought on battlefields, they're fought in the shadows of your past. And winning them is the most powerful victory of all. Tell me something. Where are you listening from tonight? Drop it in the comments because this space, we built it together. We've become a little family here, lifting each other up through stories like this. I'll be reading every single one, so come sit with us. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe so you never miss a night with this family.